Hello and welcome to the third edition of Nordicity Recaps. In these hopefully entertaining series of videos, we look back at a recent video game event and provide some insight as to what happened and why anybody should care. This is a joint operation between Interactive Ontario and Nordicity and is being hosted on the Lodge with 2Gs, which was built to celebrate Ontario-based studios and the games they develop. As a reminder, my name is Christian and I run a consulting firm. I also like to talk about the business and economics of video games. In this recap, we'll take a look at what happened at MEGAMIGS 2023 in Montreal. MEGAMIGS, like Gamescom, the subject of our last recap, is a mashup of a consumer event, the Mega Part, and an industry event, MIGS, only smaller. Although I did wander around the expo floor to pass judgment upon, play a few games, this recap will focus on the business side, as an economics consultant is wont to do. As I promised at the end of our last recap, let's talk a bit about conference themes, some of which will be a bit familiar. First, a comment on the programming of the conference itself, which seemed to offer a bit of content for everyone. Call it the Montreal Emporium of Games Learning. Want to learn more about how mergers and acquisitions are done in games? There was a session for you. Want some insight into motion capture technique? Sold! What many of those talks had in common with some manner of sales or pitch angle, be that a hard sell or an invitation to join the presenting company. While that comes naturally in a conference that needs sponsors, was particularly striking this year. In my view, this was also a reflection of a very tight labor market, hence we're hiring, and the need of some products, such as Web3 applications, to find their consumer base. Another observation made at MEGAMIGS this year was how integrated the talk of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access has become. Sure, while there were some panels on important topics like motherhood in the games industry and unlocking a diverse workforce, which were great, at the same time, the discussion has seemingly seeped into the core mindset of many other topics. Like when the conversation shifts to talent attraction, remember that tight labor market I just mentioned? Unlocking communities that haven't historically been included is a key factor. Similarly, when people start talking about how I will continue to play games late into my geriatric years, one cannot help but address adaptive controls, subtitles, and other accessibility tools. To me, this is critical. While it is important that DEIA themes continue to be highlighted and discussed on their own, it is only when this discussion is just a natural part of the overall games business, and of business in general, that meaningful change is likely to occur. It's not a thing that one does from time to time, it's all day, every day. Finally, I'll return to a recurring theme in these recaps: actual humans. While the online versions of events like MEGAMIGS held during the pandemic may have helped to increase access, for instance by removing the need to spend oodles of money on hotel room and, more importantly, bar tabs, there remains a keen interest for people to be actually in the same place as one another. Some of the best business at MEGAMIGS was found sitting in the business lounge, wandering around the expo floor, loitering after talks, eating scrumptious brisket and/or decreasingly moderately priced cocktails. Like at Pocket Gamer Connects Toronto and Gamescom, the best thing for many at MEGAMIGS was just to be there, to reconnect with business context, with friends, and friends who are about to become business contacts, my personal favorite. But how long will that feeling last? Will we get bored of one another? Opinion warning. Once again, the following views and/or opinions are Christians and do not necessarily represent anyone else, living, dead, or otherwise. In my view, the hybrid or even fully remote work style that as most companies have retained from COVID means that there will be an ever-increasing, ever-replenishing pool for the demand for co-locations with actual humans. If we spend most of our time working at home, feeling that all too human need to reconnect is likely to last. The next recap in this series will follow the arguably biggest date in the games consulting calendar, the Games Developers Conference, or GDC, in San Francisco in the spring. I and my colleagues will be there, along with a few tens of thousands of our and your closest games industry friends. In the meantime, remember to head over to thelodge.com, 2Gs, to learn more about the games industry in Ontario. They have some great content, including more on upcoming Nordicity recaps. So that's still great. See you after GDC. All right. right, I guess we're live. So I'm joined here today by with three usually Ontario-based games leaders. We have Cancito, CEO and founder of Massive Damage, who's normally in Toronto, but also sometimes in Mexico. Eric Beer, business development specialist at Joydrop in London, and Dersh, who's the CTO at Lodgge VR in Mississauga. So you're hitting a couple different parts of the, let's call it, extended province. And again, you saw the video, so you should know who I am. But if you missed out on that part, I'm Christian Roberts from Nordicity. And welcome to another Nordicity Recap, co-produced by Nordicity and, of course, Interactive Ontario. So as we usually do, I'll let these folks all start off with some shameless plugs. So tell us a little bit about your company and anything else you want to particularly plug. At the same time, you can also get into a little bit of why you went to, why you and your company were at MEGAMIGS this year, what you're hoping to accomplish, and just give us a really broad answer as to like whether or not you accomplished that. So why don't we start with Eric?
Alrighty. Hello there, everyone. My name is Eric Beer. I am, as said, from London, Ontario. And I work with Joydrop. What we do is we help people solve problems in game development, essentially. A lot of that has been porting in the last few years, but that can be a bunch of other things like optimization, tools development, etc., etc. My goal with MEGAMIGS this year was mostly to engage with relationships that I had either already established or ones that I had maintained digitally. This was my first MEGAMIGS myself, but I was to do that face to face now, and also to find sort of seeds and sprouts sort of in the Quebec game space, not just focused on the bigger boys. Yeah, that's me.
Great. Dersh, why can you tell us a little about Lodgge VR?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the CTO over at Lodgge VR. We're the development partner for PokerStars VR, which started off as a launch for PC VR in 2018 and is now grown into one of kind of like the largest social games across most of VR, with their main platform being the Oculus Quest. So we went to MEGAMIGS because we've been fairly heads down in development for the past few years. We've grown a lot, but we've been kind of mostly under the radar without a lot of public outreach. I think we're actually at this point, one of the biggest VR studios in all of Canada. But if you ask people what's Lodgge VR, there's a good chance no one's going to know what it is because we haven't really gone out there and made a name for ourselves. So our plans for the next couple of years are very ambitious and we're growing a lot, and we wanted to kind of start that outreach now. And MEGAMIGS was the first thing conference we went to in a very long time, and one of the first ones we're sponsoring. And we kind of want to start that within Canada and really push VR and gaming in Canada forwards as much as we can.
Well, thanks so much. I mean, that's how. But what an exciting moment to it's almost like a coming out party. Just look at us. All right, and Ken tell us a little about Massive Damage.
Hi, I'm Ken Cito, the CEO and co-founder of Massive Damage. We've been around for about 12 years. As shocking as that might sound, we made a couple of indie games that did pretty well. Last one was called Star Renegades. It's a pixel art, turn-based strategy RPG. And we're currently working on a very exciting Unreal 5 project. It's kind of an open world-ish action RPG with multiplayer. Very different than what we used to do. And very, very excited to tell everybody about it as soon as we're able to, which I have no idea when.
So what brought you to MEGAMIGS this year?
Yeah, so my whole thing, well, most of my responsibility as CEO is actually on the strategy and partnership side, and also doing all the publishing deals and funding deals for our company. So I go to a lot of these shows mostly for the meetings and to just kind of reconnect, make sure all my connections with all the various stakeholders and publishers and platform holders are all nice and warm for when I need them to be, to be ready for whatever we're working on next. So I didn't really have a very particular goal this time. I just kind of went and partied. Okay.
Well, I mean, as we'll get to in a bit, we did find each other at some of those bars. So I think that there is a certain part that's a certain theme to these to all of the recaps we've done is the importance of really just kind of getting out and remembering that other people exist, and it's funny the things that you end up talking about in those, while you're partying, end up being, some pretty good business. But another thing we do with these things, and as I promised you and promised the audience in the last, in our last recap, that we would do better to try to find a theme at MEGAMIGS here. Because we do try to find one of those themes and elaborate upon them, sometimes provide some industry insight. But I'll admit that the team and I we went to a bunch of different sessions, or the team did at least, and we really did struggle to find a sort of theme in the programming. And hence we called it, I guess, the Montreal Emporium of Games Learning, because it seems to touch on so many different things. So the only theme was diversity in programming. But I'm curious, did you or your teams attend any sessions? And if so, how did you, which ones, and did you see a theme? So I don't know, who wants to pick it up, but I don't know, Ken, did you go to a couple? Did you go to a few?
Yeah, I went to a couple. I mean, a lot of the sessions seem to be, I could be wrong, but it seemed to me aimed at people who were looking to, kind of get started in the industry, a little bit more junior focused, which is great for, people that are coming in to MIGS looking to join the industry, or just kind of at the beginning of their career. So I didn't find too many that seemed to kind of jump out at me. I think I went to an influencer talk about how to engage with influencers. Some of the stuff was actually quite good, but also it was a sponsored talk, so I did learn about a particular tool that I should look up when I'm done, which I am self-publishing our next game, very likely. So that was fine. That was pretty much what I was looking for.
Great. Dersh, I know your team went to a number of talks. How did they find it?
Yeah. So our team on the floor did go to a bunch of them. I think product managers like the marketing and PR ones quite a bit. They read a lot about those. Again, our team hasn't gone to these also, right? So we're fairly new in jumping into these. So getting the specific talks as opposed to the broader talks for them, I think, is more valuable. Other devs and stuff went to a couple of the talks where I think they talked about Gotham Knights and a lot of the ways that they dug deep into kind of the design decisions they made around there, and they found that very interesting. We actually had our technical director give a talk as well that we got a lot of good feedback from. But yeah, I think generally we had positive feedback from the talks. It was very all over the place, like you said, right? There's a lot of talks covering a lot of things, but very specifically, not broad things, but very specific things all over the place. So it's specific for what you want to, if you're looking for that stuff. But for those that were, I think it was pretty useful.
It was like a really high-end flea market for games learning. You could find whatever you wanted, but only one of them. Eric, I'm curious as to your experience.
So yeah, my experience was mostly speaking to a lot of individuals and a couple small groups here and there, and I actually didn't have time to catch many sessions myself, but I know me and the group I went with did get a chance to go to a couple specific ones regarding some specific tools that were there to advertise their product and do some talks here's how you use it, et cetera, et cetera. So there were some interesting things there, but I didn't experience that myself. As problem solvers, that's useful for us.
Yeah, I mean, I personally didn't end up in too many at any sessions. I think I maybe went to one or two broad ones. But so for me, my experience was I tried to go, and every time I tried to go, somebody would find me in the hallway and be like, "Chris, let's go for a beer, or let's go for a thing." So I'm curious, Eric, how that fits into sort of your earlier kind of comments on why you were there in the first place.
Yeah, that resonates with me a lot. So going into Montreal as an Ontario studio, we were very lucky to have a bunch of relationships that we were not necessarily even reheating, but just sort of getting the opportunity to connect with face to face, either for the first time in some cases or just reconnect. And listen, I got a recognizable LinkedIn profile picture. I got a face that people apparently recognize because people kept flagging me down as I was trying to sort of go around and do business, as it were. That was useful for me, and that was valuable for me. But there were sessions that I did want to go to, but people did keep flagging me down. Anyone who did flag me down and interrupt my flow or whatever, thank you for doing that. I didn't have a single bad conversation while I was there. And actually, I got the opportunity to meet some wonderful people from Lodgge VR and Ken himself as well, because I think the only real interaction we had before that point was me pestering you in emails. So that's my experience with that.
Absolutely. We'll get back to the importance of those actual humans in a second, but I'm curious. I'm going to flip this question on its head a bit and ask, okay, let's imagine that I hand you the wand, the baton that is the programming baton for, let's say, let's call it even just this year's MEGAMIGS. Obviously, the MIGS part is the part that you get to program, but let's you have the programming baton. What do you think it should have spent its time on? And a valid answer is the smorgasbord of games learning that it did. So I'm curious as to if you would have changed it, and if so, how.
If I may.
You may.
Okay. I think for event organization, there's a really tough problem everyone kind of is trying to figure out how to solve right now, and that is when the GDCs, the DICEs, etc., started up, and they are sort of the generalist events that everyone tries to go to for various reasons. Talks were the most valuable because that you go to these places to see these talks. With the popularity of games education online and sort of how much the industry is opening in general, it's a really hard problem to solve, to be like, what do we actually need to talk about that A, hasn't been talked about before, and B, is valuable to the grades of people we want to bring into the event. I wouldn't categorize MIGS in the same category as I would say GDC and DICE, but it's close enough that if I'm going to MIGS personally, especially for the work I'm doing, I'm going to Montreal to meet with the rich ecosystem that's there. If I'm already in the industry in the position I'm in as business development, maybe if I'm a solo developer or something like that, that may be different. But as someone who paid for a ticket and showed up, the thing I'm trying to tap into there is, as far as education goes, is the people I'm going there to meet. And so it's a really hard problem to solve that I don't envy them for needing to solve. They're like, what the heck do we even do with it that's valuable? And the solution I saw was sort of just, here is either people from the ecosystem in Montreal, or here's just some products we can talk about, and the products will pay us, or whatever the setup actually was to be there. And I think that's the best you can really do. If it was me as business developer, I would want less resources on talks, because I'm not there for talks. I want more access and reasons and viable options to meet with people and not have to scream over loud music to talk to them, et cetera, but I can talk about that later.
Yeah, no, fair point. But all good points. Ken, Dersh, any thoughts as to what you would do with the baton of programming, which now apparently is a D&D item?
I think the tricky part with sessions is there's some competition between different shows, and I think I believe, I haven't applied to do a GDC talk in a while, but I think I remember that one of the requirements is that you haven't done that talk anywhere else if you want to apply for a GDC talk, that it was a unique talk that hadn't been done yet. So that puts that makes it a little trickier to get as much rich content, especially the same people who might actually want to go do that same talk at GDC or do an elaborate, a more in-depth talk. Yeah, I don't know how you get around that, but I think that definitely is an issue.
And almost like exclusivity in the games industry is a topic we should talk about. But Dersh, I mean, you were there for a specific reason. I mean, how did it work from a recruitment perspective? I mean,
yeah, it was solid. It was solid from recruitment, but it was also, I think there was a lot of pain in being the first, kind of post-pandemic MIGS, right? There was a lot of issues that came up even in the planning phases, etc. I think it was messier than it should have been. I think that's going to get worked out over time. I do think that in a lot of kind of the post-pandemic world, a lot of the talks we saw here were very similar to pre-pandemic in terms of their content and what they were going over. But I think there's a lot of interesting things to discuss in stuff you could be like, how do you scale a company fully remotely now? Because there's a lot of things that haven't been done and haven't been talked about in this post-pandemic world that I think would be interesting to dig into, especially as companies have done that now for 2 years, 3 years. So they should have a lot of info on some specific stuff that may be helpful to companies starting in that space that are trying to go full remote, etc. So I would like to see like an expanded kind of scope of more modern kind of talks going forward.
That's a really good point. That's a really, really good point, and one that I think we all, like struggle with in various ways in terms of how to run a company after or in the later stages of a pandemic, right? So that's a super good point. And I to your point on organization, I think one of the lines I heard that is the best is kind of it succeeded because the people who went made it succeed. Because we all decided that we needed to see each other and extract some learning, some business and whatever from the event. And, honestly, it could have been in a barn and we would have done that. But I think that's not to say anything bad with programming. It was great, but I think the sheer energy of the humans attending, kind of was going to yield that outcome, kind of irrespective of how we did it or how it was organized.
Yeah.
Speaking of people, one of the themes that we come back to several times in these recaps is issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, access in the games industry. As mentioned in the video, we saw that in a couple of ways. There was, of course, a couple of talks, like on motherhood, that was very specifically about how do we create an inclusive games industry, or how do we include inclusive audience or diverse audiences. But I really hope, on the other end, we also saw it occurring sort of in talks that were more general in nature, let's say about hiring, about sort of like, labor market issues, like we need more people to join the industry. And so part of that solution, has been, okay, well, how are your hiring practices, touching on the broader workforce? So I'm curious, and as this debate is like, should it be like a sort of sideline, like a specific conversation, or is this something that is integral into what we do, or both? Or it's kind of, I could see merits in either, and so I'm curious as to your perspectives on those. And if possible, using examples from your own company would be great. If you could drop on those, but.
Well, we actually have a Mass Damage. We actually have a inclusivity task force, I guess. I think that's what it's called. And we're kind of at the beginning stages of that task force, just trying to figure out how best to address the diversity hiring issues and what more we can do within. Most of our hiring is in Ontario, so we're thinking, what we can do within, say, Toronto and surrounding area that maybe bring some awareness to the industry in general, and maybe help, try to promote people to kind of join the industry that may not have thought about it before. It's a little tricky now because obviously it's coming into winter. The idea of putting on sponsoring social events and stuff, I get the feeling that's still a little iffy for a lot of people. So I think that's not something that's going to happen until probably after spring starts.
Right. I'm curious. One follow-on question, Ken, and then please, Dersh and Eric, please follow on. But where did the idea? Why did you start the inclusivity task force to begin with? What was the origin point?
Well, we actually have we have 22 people in our studio now. So we had some recent growth. We went from about 10 to 22 this year, and of the 22 people, there are 4 women. So it's still not quite good enough, we feel. And but the task force itself was actually created out of a request from one of our developers who thought that he wanted to make sure that we're putting some more effort into equalizing this a bit more. And so we thought that was a great idea, and we kind of basically created this task force to kind of at least do some investigation, do some exploration, brainstorming, see what actions we can come up with.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, great. And, Eric or Dersh, anything you want to comment on? Either about is this a topic that we deal with specifically or generally or anything with your own organizations?
I mean, I think integrating it into just general discussions is important, because it, especially like, until it gets to the point where it's normalized, and we're kind of normalized, and we're at a point where it's fine, because otherwise you risk it falling behind, or it's in a track that people don't go, they focus on certain tracks. I think including it in just day-to-day discussion and on like the main track is important. Internally at Lodgge, we've obviously had, so we have hires all over the place from a bunch of different backgrounds, bunch of different genders, but I think in terms of like being able to hire those people, it's still very much it is still very much a male predominant like industry, right? And it's changing slowly, but it's going to take time. Even in just inbounds and even outreach, like it's very limited in terms of who you'll find. And I've found this is part of why we're again trying to do outreach on Lodgge, is like a lot of minorities and people who are marginalized are looking specifically to get into like what they consider the big company, like the FANG companies of gaming, right? So it's even harder for someone like us to actually go out and get those people, because you're trying to convince them to come to, well, what is Lodgge VR, right? So it's definitely not there yet, because that's the case, right? I think there's a lot of work that we still have to do, and I think bringing it into like the general kind of discussion as opposed to separating it out is important.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Fair enough. I just my follow on there is just, do you have, I mean, it's like entirely speculation. I'm curious as to like why you think that folks might be more attracted to the sort of, as you say, the large companies, like all other things being equal, like why would they go in that direction? I mean, I presume you've felt this in real life with people going from one getting to that final stage and then picking one of them over you. So I'm curious as to if you have any reasons.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think it's like a for us specifically, it seemed kind of like a validation of entry, or like a validation of being in the industry, is like you are in that, you got into Meta, you got into Google, but like you got into Ubisoft, you got into EA, you got into etc., right? It's like the title of like, you're telling your friends, I got in to Lodgge VR, good for you, cool, right? But like you got into Ubisoft, you got into EA, it has a different kind of connotation to it. And I think that's kind of where it stemmed from, is validating that industry, especially when it's so predominantly kind of male. Like getting into those companies seems like a very, like a big win, essentially.
Especially for the younger set that are just trying to start off their career. I mean, getting that on their resume, can't blame them for wanting that, especially if they also grew up playing those games made by those companies. Yeah,
fair enough. All right, Eric, last part of this talk that goes to you. I'm just curious as to again your thoughts on sideline. Is this a specific conversation? Is it a general conversation? And then tell us a little bit about how things are at your job.
So I would say it's both. Unfortunately, like the reality answer is it depends. I 100% resonate with, it kind of has to be worked into the general conversation. There has to be an understanding of where a company is failing and succeeding in diversity and inclusion. I also very much resonate with, you put these job postings out there and you try and go grab people, and you get this many of one type of resume, this many of this resumes from another group, this many from another group. And it's not easy for anyone in that sort of equation, I would say. Insofar as specific conversations, especially with companies like diversity and inclusion happens in one of two ways. Either it's built in from the ground up and leadership is diverse, because people will hire people like themselves, right? That will happen. Or you spend a bunch of resources after the fact to retrofit appropriate scalable solutions to the diversity problem. And I would absolutely, I 100% want to congratulate and say good job, like Ken, for starting that task force, because like we're not the biggest companies in the industry right now, and that kind of stuff we know on our side as well takes a lot of resources to actually be able to like sit down and do, and time, and work's got to get done at the same time, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to put that there as well. It is something that is very important to me personally, especially with our own event that we do, Game Slice, which, you know, that's going to be its own thing as the future grows, but also in Joy Drop and the work we do. Insofar as I think the way the industry can do better, because I think it's been getting better, and as Dersh said, like we're going to see that progress incrementally. I would like to see sort of this diversity, equity, inclusion, and even accessibility conversations happening with people even further, like even earlier in their journey. Because like a lot of colleges and educational institutions have developers in them who are teaching, and they're talking about their experiences in the old days, and they might be teaching in that space. But even then, I ask, what of people in high school who want to get into games? How many people are we losing from that space to college, and how many people are we losing from college to the workforce? Clearly a lot, because we have this list of this type of resume, then this type of resume, then this type of resume from different groups. So clearly those people who are marginalized and have to work, if someone's in the same position as me and they're in a different minority group, they're going to have to work harder than me to get into the same position I'm in. I know that. And it would be really nice if we could take this and put it even further so we lose less of those people to get to resumes. I don't think that answers exactly your question, but that's where
No, it's all good questions. But it's interesting that we've all looked at this problem from a hiring perspective, and like, how do we change the workforce? And I think one of there's at least two other ways of looking at diversity, right? There's, you know, if this was if we were talking about film and television, we would probably also be talking about representation on screen. And so that's another opportunity. We can maybe circle back to that, you know, content diversity in a moment. But the other one that we haven't talked about is, and I find less talked about, is diversity of audience, right? And so I'm curious as to if anybody spends time thinking about at least understanding the demographics of your audience beyond sort of like 18 to 34 people who spend money. And whether or not that influences game design and like, you know, that end of the spectrum. So is that something that shows up in any of your sort of design processes that you know of?
I'll go on.
Okay, who's going?
Go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So for us, it does. For us, I mean, so we're a social experience. People customize their own avatars. They come in with their avatars representing themselves however they want to represent themselves. And we, on top of that, have, you know, an expansive store of apparel items to where that in designing even those items, you need to make sure that you're taking into account a wide range of people. So a lot of the design for apparel it does have like inclusivity in mind and understanding like what our player base is, understanding it's not all one type of person. It is like a very, very broad range of people across a bunch of different, you know, religions, genders, etc. So really enabling them to represent themselves how they want. And I think you'll find in a lot of social games that's very heavily kind of focused on. You know, when you get to like single player titles where the character you're playing is the character you're playing, it's a little bit different, I imagine. But I think for social games, it's like a very, very important part of the design process for sure.
Anybody feel like you want to jump on that before we move on?
I look at inclusivity in games the same way I look at monetization in games, insofar as it's something that if it matters to you, you should be thinking about from day one and building that into what you're building from in order for it to be successful. Now, obviously, the success criteria are much different, but even those two things can feed into each other in their own ways. But that's not really the thing I care about. It's just so far as like you if it's something you shoehorn in, whether for clout or even just a genuine desire late in the game, no pun intended, then that will show. And I think that will resonate differently with different people. Yeah.
No, fair enough. That's a totally fair point. Again, people will tell when it's a tack on. Anyways, Ken, last word if you want it.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our game, it's more about just making sure that in the characters that we present in the game, there is a wide enough variance in types and looks to make everybody feel like they're not everybody, but there is some representation across the board, and we're not trying to present any one type as the best. Or we're still working out on how our play characters will work out, but yeah, we're definitely keeping all of that in mind.
Fair point. Not everybody needs to be bearded, tall, male. Me, I guess.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
Look like me. All right. So on to our last theme that I wrote. We identified, of course, is the importance of real people. It was really great to see people at conferences. I mean, both at the conference itself and at various cocktail bars. Looking at you, Ken. But I know it's all fun, and we touched on this earlier. But I also think it's an integral part of actually like where business happens at these types of events. And I was wondering if you might sort of contrast the kind of pros and cons of the accessibility of a virtual experience for everybody, where there's like no barrier to entry, you don't have to pay expensive plane tickets, and this sort of the I guess, I don't know, the depth of experience that you find at something like MEGAMIGS, where you can actually be there and sort of immerse yourself in the experience. I don't know. I'm gonna go with Eric. I wonder if you might start us off on this one.
Okay. So like the fact of the matter is, if you're making people travel to a location, the inclusivity, the accessibility of the event goes down. That's just mathematics, right? You're losing people. And from the number of events I've gone to in the digital space and in person, and there's a good group of people I've spoken to who just don't have an interest of going back and doing the work for the in-person event. So there are people out there who will stay digital, and they want to stay digital, and they see the benefit from that. But holy crap, is the in-person, face-to-face, the power of that so tangible, especially from my experience with MIGS this year. I think it's very important for people to find what's important for them in game development. But if you're trying to sell things and you're trying to understand your industry and the people you're going to be working with, like there's nothing you can do digitally to make it the relationship building you can get in person the same. I think it's a very good analog. I think a bunch of different events have tried different things. I think even like Meet to Match Online, they did the best with what they could do, and it was pretty good. But like there's definitely a je ne sais quoi to it that I think you're not going to be able to mimic. And that I got great value from. Even like I don't drink a lot myself, so I'm not going to these parties a lot. I just think there's something about humans being social and going, oh, you're a real person. I don't know why I'm pretending to touch someone's face. I didn't do that at MIGS, but there you go.
There's something to be said for just being around, ubiquitous presence.
Yeah,
I think that's just it's a psychological thing as well. I think especially if you're dealing with a lot of the same people that you're seeing at various shows. So I did Gamescom and I did GDC before I did MIGS, and I'm seeing a lot of the same people, and that it just happens that when you're seeing the same people all the time, should something come up where you're like, oh, I think I'd like to work with somebody on this new thing, and who's around? And guess what? The next show it's the same people you saw at the last show. And guess who's around? These people. And who comes to mind? Those same people.
Yeah, no, it's central to my business development strategy. I like as Ken put it, just being around.
Mhm.
You can't go to a games industry thing and not find meat hanging around. All right, Dersh, I'm curious as to your view on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of value in meeting in person. I think Unity Unite did an interesting kind of way of doing it with a combo, right? Of in person and remote. It wasn't the same. So we had some people on the floor there, and we had some people looking remote. It is not the same thing. In person is definitely, though. That's where you're gonna get the intimate, conversations that you're not gonna get remotely if you're just watching over, essentially as an audience member with no way to interact with anyone that you want to interact with, right? So there's a lot of value in be doing it in person. I think we should probably offer the opportunity for people who are less privileged and can't come to watch things remotely. Especially those people are maybe the ones that will get the most out of those talks, right? So I think giving people those opportunities is valuable, and I don't think at this point it's not something that's super difficult to do in terms of like just streaming it over Twitch, etc. So I think it's something that we should do going forward in person. As a fully remote studio, like we actually found that we obviously have to do in-person things. We actually did a couple of days after MIGS, the weekend of MIGS, we flew everybody in the company down, and we had 2 days of every single person in the company getting to know each other in a way that they hadn't been able to do remotely, and even that is super valuable. So there's a tremendous amount of value to just the in-person like connection you can make that you can't really do over fully remote. So
I would like to add a little bit of an addendum to that as well. So as business development, my job is to foster relationships, etc., etc., right? I like resonate very deeply with people who are like conscious of their health for these events, and I will say right now, if you're like, especially if you're immunocompromised, like these events are not worth your health. I can 100 all we can big up in person all we want, but like I myself am very COVID conscious. I'm not particularly immunocompromised, but like I think that also needs to be said as well. Like it, these are great. Being able to meet and talk people and beating the pavement, as it were, of these conferences is amazing. And there's something you will miss by not going to it, but it's not worth your health as well. Like easy answer, 100% of the time. I think also the one thing I would like to also add to that is if there is a comfort there, or if there's a safety there, or something you can do. I saw people wearing masks on the floor. I was one of them in a couple instances as well. Um, um, don't be afraid to make the event more comfortable for yourself as well. And if you are someone who is very heads down developer, maybe you're a younger studio and you're just working on your game and we'll go to events when we have our game. Even if it's just digitally, make the time, put some resources into it, spend some time being out there, even just digitally. I've seen value returned to Joy Drop as a company from conferences we went to as a company 10 years ago. So you never know. And maybe you have to pick and choose which ones are more valuable to you and why, but that's something I would also like to say.
No, that's a fair point. I think you could extend that point to say also, like, we talked a lot about, going to the bar or whatever, but I think it's also important to have that there be opportunities for people who are sober, that want to remain sober, to be able to participate in the same kind of ways as you touched on earlier, Eric. So I think that's just recalling, to a recall to that previous point, because I think it was also a well-made one.
And since we are talking about like how wonderful it was to meet people in person again, I think there's also it was kind of touched upon a little bit earlier in the conversation where like one of my expectations was being able to go to MIGS and meet a bunch of folks from Montreal who were at these giant dev studios and be able to meet some people, make connections. That did not happen. That was not the vibe from some of these larger studios that I found. A lot of people were doing hiring stuff, which is fine, but those aren't the people who are going to be there discussing business with you. They're going to be there discussing, hey, do you want a job? Which is, again, fine, but that's its own thing. I found more success with smaller studios of varying degrees of age. I think that's also like a worthwhile part of the discussion for value of going in person.
Absolutely.
Can you ever do like I don't know what I would call it. I guess a etymology of the deals that you've done. Like the current game we're working on is funded by Calvin Knights, And if I was to trace back the steps of how this deal got done, it started off me freezing outside. It was I think it was like at the MIG like 5 years ago, maybe. Me freezing outside the speakeasy big in Japan, and waiting to get into this very exclusive party. I think Epic was inside, and I was waiting. The doorman's only letting in like one person, seemed like every 20 minutes or so. And it was because I was freezing in line. The person behind me was another studio founder from Montreal, and I got to know him quite well in line, and that eventually led to getting introduced to Kowloon, and there was a bunch of random noodle stuff going on in Hong Kong, and everything was all serendipitous until the deal was done. Yeah,
So manufactured serendipity, right? You set the context for serendipity.
Yeah.
Another thing that sort of came to mind in this space as well is, speaking of like, there are no straight lines in games really. As much as you'd like to see them, they don't really happen that often in my experience. And following up on sort of the trail that had to happen socially for Ken, for you to land a partner like this. Like, I also have seen a version of that in online game dev community spaces, not necessarily online game dev events, but like there's Discord servers out there everywhere. And if you're the type of person who can, like, I think the key to that is being able to just build a relationship from nothing and being willing to like play the long game in a way. That's a little bit too cynical of a phrasing for it, but just like, if you're at least out there trying to meet people and trying to make friends and just like grow your own network in that way, I think you will see a type of success that is similar to the degree which we're discussing as in person. Although it might take longer, it might be shorter, but that's something I think I would also want to address out of this.
Perfect. All right. Any last thoughts, Dersh, before I give you you guys all an opportunity to replug?
No, nothing else to add there.
Perfect. Okay. Well, what I'll ask is that you let us know what's next on the horizon for your company. Ken's already done this in a bit, but what should we be looking out for? Is there anything that we should be excited about? And as you do that, maybe contemplate one thing about MIGS that you think makes it unique or stand out as it relates to all the other games industry events that we talked about. And I'll go last because I actually have an answer for that one. So I don't know, Dersh, why don't you start with when we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So MIGS it was great for us. It's kind of our first, again, foray into going to these kind of conferences, and we're intending to do a bunch more. So it's going to be great. Hopefully, seeing everyone there at whatever the next one is. In terms of for our company, what we're doing, what's next, we're scaling up still. So we're growing significantly in the next year, looking to likely get another 80-ish people on board. So if anyone's interested in, anyone listening is interested in XR, AR, VR, metaverse stuff, we have some very, 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 very ambitious plans, and we need some very, very talented people to achieve those. And Canada has a lot of talent, so let me know.
All right. Well, you heard him. Okay, Eric, what's up for you?
So I won't be able to share many details, unfortunately, but aside from just the things I've discussed here, we have a lot of irons in the fire, as it were, that I'm very excited about just internally. Very funny for us to talk about how much hiring and recruitment there was done at MIGS for me to then come in after Dersh and say, we're also hiring, we're also expanding. We are actually specifically looking for an art director right now for some really exciting things. Trust me, it's exciting. That's all I can give you.
We believe you. We believe you. You seem trustworthy.
I'm looking forward to how the Ontario game dev scene will grow, especially, hey, shout out to Lodgge, right? And how we can help be a part of that as well. I think that's my plug. Go Joe Drop. Ooh.
All right, Ken. All right, so what can you tell us about what we should be excited about?
Well, I think at Master Damage, actually our motto is indie spirit with big vision, and we basically hold on to that by making sure our culture is still kind of grounded in the indie spirit. But the games that we're working on, we're kind of graduating a little bit from the pixel art stuff that we used to do. So our next game is Unreal 5 engine, doing some really exciting stuff with that, and bringing a lot of our, I guess, uniqueness of the games that we've made before, bringing that forward to maybe something more of a AAA, not AAA, so a AA experience. And it's been really exciting for us. And I think we're going to be ramping up on hiring as well, like everybody else, in the soon in the new year. So yeah, that's kind of our focus right now. We'll be growing a bit and getting this game prepped for its proper reveals, hopefully sometime later in the next year.
I also bought and played Star Renegades. It's a good game, so all of you go buy it and play.
Oh, thank you.
Very good, excellent, double plug. That's the meta plug. All right, okay, Ken. So one question as a vet who's been to a number of these events, where does MEGS place in the circuit? You know, what is its role in the circuit of games events in your mind?
Actually, for me, MEGS is actually one of my favorite shows because it's odd, and I'm not. This is not a slight against Toronto developers, but I feel like there's a much more warmer camaraderie happening in Montreal. I don't know why. Not that anything wrong with Montreal, but I actually have more friends among Montreal developers than I do with Toronto developers, and I'm not trying to be biased or anything. This is just what's happened from going to MEGS, and but I've actually also connected with other Toronto developers through MEGS. So for me, it's basically the one show that I can connect with a lot of other local Canadian developers, and that's really, really nice. Because you go to GDC or Gamescom and it's just massive. So for me, that's why I love going to MEGS every year. When I was around.
You stole my answer, Ken. That was more or less exactly what I was going to say. It's just it's exactly right. I mean, it's I see more people. I mean, I live and work in downtown Toronto. I know a lot of game developers, and I see most of them at MEGS, and it's easier somehow because then everybody's like available to go and have a beer that they were never available. You're at home, you're never available because you always get your head down working on something. But okay, let's go have a coffee. We have time to talk.
Yeah, if there's one thing I could say about Ontario game devs, it's all of us. We should maybe look up from our keyboards just a little bit more often and try and make the time to come together. This was my first MIGS, and I as someone who's lived in Ontario all of his life and has been a game dev for a good chunk of years at this time, I resonate with what Ken's describing.
Yeah, it's just funny how that works. All right, well, I think unless there's any other questions from the floor, I think I will thank you all for your time. And this will conclude this round of the Nordicity Recaps, of course, which is a partnership between Interactive Ontario and Nordicity, because it's in the name. The next one of these we will do after the the brightest star in the sky of games industry events, the good old GDC in San Francisco. I'm sure I will end up seeing many of you there. There's lots of business to be developed, games to be worked upon or sold or shown, and VR to be people to be hired for that matter. Meantime, remember to head over to the Lodgge.com with 2 G's to learn more about the games industry in Ontario. There's some great content there, of course, including more about these sorts of Nordicity recaps. So again, thank you to Ken, Eric, and Dersh for taking the time out of your day, and thank you to those of you joining us taking time of your day.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.